Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into a really fascinating mystery today. Imagine this. A researcher walks into a room full of crying babies from all over the world. The British babies are crying, the Canadian babies are crying, the Italian babies are screaming. But then, over in the corner, there's a group of Japanese babies, and they are completely calm. Now, the researcher runs this study 3 more times and gets the exact same result every single time. It all traces back to an incredible study from the University of Warwick that analyzed data from nearly 8,700 infants across multiple countries. They tracked one specific metric, how much those babies cried. And what they found in this massive data set challenges almost everything we think we know about infant psychology. So the Warwick study, which was actually published in the Journal of Pediatrics, revealed this stunning hierarchy of crying. British babies cried the absolute most. Canadian babies were a close, ear-piercing second. Italian, Dutch, and American babies all ranked incredibly high up there too. But at the very bottom of the list, crying the least and fussing the least, were the Japanese babies. Now, they're the exact same species with the exact same biology and the exact same basic human needs, right? So the central question we really have to ask ourselves here is, what on earth do Japanese mothers do differently in the first 90 days of a baby's life that nobody else seems to be doing? Just to help you grasp exactly how wide that gap really is, consider this fact. Only 2% of Japanese infants experience colic in their first 6 weeks of life. 2%. Compare that to Canada, where that number absolutely skyrockets to over 34%. The data just keeps pointing to this uncomfortable but undeniable truth. Japanese babies cry less, they sleep better, and they self-regulate much earlier than babies in almost every other country on Earth. And guess what? The reason has absolutely nothing to do with genetics or diet. It actually comes down to a highly specific approach to care. Let's dive into Section 1, the 2-word secret. This incredible difference in infant calm is actually rooted in a parenting philosophy that Western cultures largely abandoned decades ago. And to be clear, it isn't about having perfect parents or a superior culture. It's about a highly specific, hidden psychology that boils down to 2 untranslatable Japanese words. The first word is amai. It was originally described by the Japanese psychiatrist Teo Doi. And honestly, because it doesn't translate perfectly into English, Western parenting never really adopted it. But the closest definition we have is the deep expectation of being understood without having to ask. Just think about how profound that is for a tiny infant. In the West, we generally operate on a reactionary model, right? The baby cries, the parent responds. But amai shifts the entire goal of parenting. The goal isn't to react to a baby's distress. The goal is to actually prevent that distress from happening in the first place. The companion concept to ame is mimamorder, which roughly translates to watch and protect. This is the practice of observing your baby so incredibly closely and continuously that you begin to read them before they ever have to speak or cry. You start catching these tiny microsignals. Maybe it's just a slight tension in the shoulders that happens exactly 3 minutes before hunger truly hits. Or maybe it's a subtle change in their breathing that signals overstimulation, or a particular stillness right before emotional overwhelm. By catching these signals before the actual cry happens, the baby's brain learns, literally at a cellular level, that the world is predictable and safe. Their nervous system naturally wires itself to a baseline of calm, which ultimately builds the neurological foundation for secure attachment and lifelong self-regulation. When we look at these 2 models side by side, we see a really fundamental difference. The Western models is essentially all about reacting to distress. Western mothers spend an average of about 24 hours a week completely away from their baby in the first year. Through this separation and the cycle of crying and responding, the baby learns, hey, I have a voice and I can change my world. It actively builds early self-expression. The Japanese model, on the flip side, is about preventing distress entirely. Japanese mothers average just 2 hours a week away from their babies. They utilize constant carrying in slings, physical proximity, and co-sleeping. Because the gap between the baby's need and the parent's response is so consistently small, the Japanese baby's nervous system simply never learns to escalate. They never develop that intense, prolonged crying because, well, the escalation was never necessary in the first place. Moving right along to Section 2, the 5-minute walk. So to move from philosophy to hard biological science, researchers at Japan's Riken Brain Science Institute wanted to know what actually happens physiologically inside a baby's body when a caregiver steps in to soothe them. They took crying infants and literally attached heart rate monitors to measure exactly what happened under various conditions. They tried having the mother hold the baby while just sitting down. They tried rocking in a chair. They even tried pushing them in a stroller. And you know what? None of those worked consistently. But then, they tried one highly specific condition: carrying the crying baby with smooth forward walking for exactly 5 minutes. The results were absolute. When a mother picked up her crying baby and walked with smooth forward movement, 100% of the babies stopped crying by the end of those 5 minutes. Every single one. Let's break down this biological cascade minute by minute because it shows exactly what's happening under the surface. At 0 minutes, the baby's nervous system registers the physical movement and proximity, basically saying, okay, I'm being carried, I'm safe. By minute 1, you can visibly see their heart rate drop on the monitors. At 3 minutes in, their physical muscle tone actually decreases. They literally physically relax in the parent's arms. And at that magic 5-minute mark, cortisol, which is the body's primary stress hormone, begins to plummet. This absolutely proves that this isn't some fancy new gadget or a $200 white noise machine or a complex sleep training method. It is a fundamental physiological reset button for the baby's nervous system, driven entirely by biology. Which brings us to Section 3, realities and trade-offs. I want to be completely real with you here because this is an absolutely crucial point. The intense physical proximity required by traditional Japanese parenting just isn't realistic for every modern parent. But looking at the trade-offs, both approaches come with entirely different developmental paths, and both produce perfectly healthy adults. The Japanese approach focuses on preventing distress, and while these children become exceptional at self-regulation, the data shows they actually develop self-recognition and independence slightly later than Western children do. The Western approach focuses on reacting to distress, which means the baby has to experience that initial distress to get their needs met, but this very process builds robust early self-expression. The big takeaway here isn't that you need to abandon Western parenting wholesale. If you're an exhausted working parent, a single parent, or doing this without extended support, being away for only 2 hours a week is genuinely impossible. But we can still borrow the underlying psychology. And that brings us to Section 4, 4 practical principles. This is exactly how we merge these two worlds. We can take the core principles from the Japanese data and create a highly practical toolkit you can literally start using tonight, no matter what your overall parenting style is. First up is the pre-cry scan. Every morning when you pick up your baby, just spend 60 seconds observing. Don't feed them, don't stimulate them, just look. Learn their baseline and those tiny microsignals so you become fluent in their silent language. Second, the 5-minute walk. The next time your baby is absolutely inconsolable, put everything down, pick them up, and walk with smooth forward steps for 5 minutes. Trust the biology on this one. Third is gap reduction. You absolutely do not have to be perfect, but simply shaving 30 seconds off how long it takes you to respond to early signals before full escalation hits can change the entire dynamic. Finally, the AME question. Try shifting from being a reactive responder to an anticipatory reader. Ask yourself, what does my baby need right now before they even have to tell me? Let's wrap up today's explainer with a really powerful final thought. A crying baby isn't a broken baby. It's a baby's gap between need and response is simply too wide. The Japanese figured this out thousands of years before we ever had heart rate monitors and cortisol tests to back it up. It's all about presence, attention, and the radical act of knowing your baby so incredibly well that they don't ever have to ask twice. So I'll leave you with this. What subtle, silent microsignals might your baby be sending right now? And how could closing that tiny gap change your entire relationship tomorrow?